The Collins of Chard. Chapter 4. Rural Homestead. When Harry and Rosa took up residence in Rosalie Cottage in 1891, Rosa's widowed sister, Audrey Haynes, née Bevis, moved in at the same time to the next but one Inn Cottage. This was a convenient arrangement, for she was able to help out when her sister was confined the following year, and thereafter as the family grew. Audrey had a daughter, Florence Kate, who married my uncle Wilfrid Cyril in 1945. He worked as a nurseryman at a small holding up the road. Wilfrid, who preferred to be called by his second name Cyril, was the fifth son of Harry and Rosa, and born in 1901. As the years went by and the family increased, Audrey's assistant became vital to the smooth running of the Collins household. Either the children's clothes couldn't always be handled then, the next in line was not of the same sex, or they were still needed. To meet the problem, there was a system of loans of necessary items from the lying-in charity. These essential clothes items, including sheets and pillows, were kept by lady members of the church for just such an instance. However, you had to apply for them, and you had to be of good repute. Having to make this application put people off. Buying what was necessary at the White Elephant stall was judged to a more acceptable way of coming by the needed items. Harry Collins had regular features with a sloping forehead, fiery eyebrows, and a military moustache. Thinning grey-black hair swept back gave him the look of a firm schoolmaster, which his height reinforced. He was always dressed in black, a collarless, thin, striped shirt under an open waistcoat, held together by his watch chain. His boots, which he was never seen without, were made of highly polished, soft black leather. His weather-beaten countenance friendly and warm. The wrinkled forehead suggested much thought, and his eyes, with their canopy of shaggy brows, gave a penetrating gaze to us small children. His voice and manner was gruff, a product of many years of smoking strong tobacco, using a cob pipe. Rosa was a good foot shorter than her husband, but not lacking in will or authority. Her grey hair, always tightly twisted onto her head, was tightly pinned. She controlled and led the house and its occupants. She was never challenged, and played a close hand at whist. I don't remember her without a penny and her sleeves rolled up. Rhoda's voice was high-pitched and brittle, using an even stronger local patois than her husband's was. And being one of 9 and the daughter of a respected farmer, she had an authority which came from a highly respected household. Her father farmed 500 acres and operated his own granary. Both these occupations demanded a good head for organization and business. Rosa had been raised to follow Christian principles, and as a child she attended Chard Church 3 times on a Sunday, as well as attending the Sunday school. Rosalie Cottage had been built a few years before Harry rented the house for his new bride. It had been built as an add-on to 2 original 3-story semi-detached cottages, built at an earlier age. There were 2 rooms on the ground floor, the larger being the living room, contained the cooking range, and the other the parlour. Upstairs led to 3 bedrooms off a landing, and outside a lean-to extension housed a workshop, kitchen and scullery. The greenhouse used the extension as a back wall. The house was accessed from Perry Street by a bow-topped wooden gate set in a flint wall capped by large upright stones, beyond which a path led to the front door. The napped flint and brick cottage nestles in their own gardens behind the garden wall, which runs round 3 sides of the plot. To the rear, the ground sloped up the hill. This rural homestead rests on a spot where the open down falls away to lush meadows that lie in a valley, Coombe or Coombe, sheltered from the west, a word derived from cum, Old English for a valley on the flank of a hill. The greater part of Tatworth had thatched, roofed, timber-framed houses with lime-washed walls over cob, a mixture of soil, clay, straw and lime, with tiny inserted windows. A cob wall is built up slowly, packed down between boards or hurdles, each layer allowed to dry before the next up, before the boards removed, when the cob hardened. This was, in many circumstances, the method by which the enlargements of ancient hovels were built randomly along the track, usually of 2 bedrooms, that had to cater for the large families of the period. Through extension, additional dwelling space built on, windows enlarged and roof spaces developed. None had main services until the water piped to the village in the late 30s. Farm labourers were paid 30 shillings a week, and a carter with 2 horses to look after got 38 shillings. 1929 was a year of, it seemed, continued rain. It was unceasing. The hay turned black, and trying to judge when it could be picked up, even with a hay dryer, was difficult. The farmers waited until October, and still there were few days of continued sun. The year before prices had been bad, and the farmers' accounts were low. Now the poor harvest compounded to make the position worse. There was a great deal of unemployment, and a movement away from the land into the towns and cities. The pride of the home was the new wireless set, with its fretted front panel, glowing valves, wave-band squeak and trailing aerial, powered by an accumulator charged at the local garage. The announcers, pedantically enunciating the King's English, and the style of music that of Edward German or Albert Gettelby. Like the rest of society, the programmes were refined, precise and structured, and as children we still played with our cat's whiskers and headphones, using a saucepan to improve the sound. The main meeting house open to all was the Poppe Inn. Before 1927 it was named the Country Inn or Hotel. The County Inn or Hotel. Initially in 1964 it was a cottage called Culverhays, owned by John Bowditch. Straw-thatched roof with chamfered first-floor beams, a mark of quality, and inglenook fireplace. My grandad and his sons frequented its low-beamed interior most nights, for at least a couple of hours, and in the club-room they played skittles, dominoes, or shove halfpenny whilst drinking cider. Most of the men of the village joined them for at least one night of the week. The pub, with cider at 2d a pint, provided a venue for the working men to meet, to discuss their jobs, the weather, and all those things which controlled their lives. The women and children were banned in the tap-room, and even in the saloon bar it was very unusual to find a woman. The pub was the preserves of men. Women, for the most part, met each other whilst passing the gate, to gossip over the garden wall, invite neighbours in for a cup of tea, to read the tea leaves. There were sewing parties and mothers' meetings, but in the main women didn't meet up in an organised fashion until a particular venue. The men were social, using the pub to remove themselves from the sound of children and the insistent wife, who always needed help. The pub kept them in touch with the latest gossip and created a kind of kindred spirit, where the topic of conversation was the state of their kitchen garden, the troublesome weather, and the success or failure of the weekend football or cricket match. It was a matter of great concern how well the village was doing in both these games, and even though not everyone played, all were most keen to hear that their village was represented successfully. At some point in the evening someone would start singing some well-known folk song, which would be accompanied by others joining in with a comb and paper, penny whistle, and on a good night a piano player. On a dark and windy night, when the fire was blazing well, you could hear the jollity going on down the street as the door opened to let in yet another caroller, bathed in a stream of warm light to cries of "Hallo!" In 1931 was another bad year, for the rain fell all through that summer. It was wet throughout, which was depressing enough without the national economy being under considerable strain. The Lord Chancellor ordered a compulsory wage reduction of all salary and wage earners, and for a 50-hour week the labourers earned £3. Grandma tried to make up the shortfall by selling some eggs. The police house in the village was not looked on as somewhere out of bounds, but one of refuge and help. There was no serious crime, only petty poaching, chicken stealing, pub brawls, and the occasional robbery. There was just one policeman who walked and rode on his bike to check the roads, shops and houses. It was a matter of long hours of tedious work, making sure that each day all of the area was covered at least once. He had to check that the public house closed on time and that there was no bad behaviour and noise created by the last ones to leave. Every year the constable paid a visit to the school to talk to the children about not stealing or harming animals. It was a matter of showing his face and getting to know the children personally. The same applied to the sports field, where he always strolled around to show support and interest. It was expected that he should put in an appearance at church at least once on Sundays. The village policeman found it was in his interest to meet as many village people as possible, to see them at work and in their home environment. It made his job easier to be on friendly terms, especially with the leaders of the community. Most of the workers in the village, if not directly associated with the land, had an interest in rural matters, and even those men working at the mill or dairy had relations who were agricultural labourers or knew someone connected with farm animals. It was a rural landscape, and that would never change. And to a man they were all poorly paid. Even those who had authority or skill had little more than their unskilled counterparts did. There is a certain binding of spirits when the majority were in the same boat, scraping a living, and their houses were mostly badly built, cold, damp and rotting. To keep them clean and dry was an uphill battle fought by the women. And gradually this picture changed until the First World War brought to a sudden end the status quo which had been the position up to and during Queen Victoria's reign. Then workers had rights and demanded a little more consideration, and as their wages increased, so did their horizons, especially those who valued education. The population increased in the late 1800s, supplied labour for the new industrial society. For towns and villages that had no local factory or business that required a large staff, the young adults drifted away. There were only a few who were content to work in large houses or estates. The rest had to look elsewhere. With the technical advances made to agricultural machines, creating a knock-on effect to allied engineering component manufacturers who devised tools to mass-produce small parts, there was a general interest in all manners technical. There was no part of society that didn't feel the change, and the young wished to take part in the new society about them. This disruption to the old order and the mobility of the young, particularly those using the facilities presented by the new railway companies, allowed a migration away from the country. The young factory staff, construction workers, shipbuilders and domestic servants provided a stimulus to marriage and home building, which in turn caused an increase in the birth rate. At the beginning of the 19th century, There were only 15 towns with more than 20,000 inhabitants, and by the middle there were 63. At the turn of the century, 80% of the population lived in urban districts. With 10 or more thousand in the first quarter of the 20th century, only 10% of the population owned their own home. By the late 30s, it was 25%. These statistics amply demonstrate the energy generated by man producing more food, and this began in the Middle Ages. The protection of the nation's wheat harvest had continued intermittently. The corn laws were repealed during the Great Irish Hunger, and there was a national need to produce more cheap food to make the country self-sufficient.